it's shameful to interrupt a public gathering of Christians in worship.
But there were folks who will say,
I have to take care of my flock.
okay, but listen, we live in there's a constitution in the First Amendment to freedom of speech and freedom to assemble and protest.
Yeah. We're here to worship.
MAGA administration and the fake news MAGAs are losing their mind over something that's not even true. I had no affiliation to that organization. I didn't even know they were going to this church until we followed them there. We were there chronicling protests. Once the protest started in the church, we did an act of journalism, which was report on it and talk to the people who were involved, which included the pastor, members of the church, and members of the organization. That's it.
Journalism is not a badge or a shield that protects you from criminal consequences when you are part of a crime. And I think the videos show how close he was to these folks. I think further evidence will show more information about that. But he clearly knew, and he stated before going into the facility, it's on his own video, what was going to happen there.
All right, well, huge breaking news this morning as good old Don Lemon has just been arrested by federal agents in Los Angeles in connection to his involvement with a Minneapolis anti-ICE church storming just a couple of weeks ago, after it turns out that a grand jury did not find his initial argument of it was First Amendment protected protest, or even his later pivot of I was just there as a journalist, to be all that convincing. And perhaps the hilarious part of all of this is that the federal laws now being used against Lemon and the anti-ICE agitators are actually ones that historically were both written by Democrats and weaponized against pro-life activists and right-wingers for years. By the way, I'd like to point out as well that there are multiple January 6thers that were there just filming, right? They were there as quote-unquote journalists, and then in that case, the Biden administration did not find those arguments to be all that convincing, but of course, now there is a massive firestorm. This is weaponization. This is a crackdown on free speech. No, nobody's against the law. Actually, as a matter of fact, it turns out that leftists do not understand the First Amendment, or now more recently, the Second Amendment that they constantly keep trying to, cite in defense. But we'll bring you all of these details here today, guys. This is a big story. It turns out. First, though, do us a favor. If you enjoy our content, make sure you hit that like button down below. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. We greatly appreciate the support. And that said, take a listen to these details, because at first we were dealing with a situation where liberal judge in Minneapolis after liberal judge refused to bring the case, and so essentially what the DOJ did is go to a grand jury to get that indictment, and now, by the jury of his peers, turns out there's more than enough here to bring criminal charges. Take a listen.
Our colleague David Spunt and I getting this breaking news from multiple law enforcement sources just minutes ago, confirming that former CNN anchor Don Lemon has been arrested by federal agents in Los Angeles just after midnight this morning at a hotel. This obviously all in connection with that storming of a church in St. Paul, Minnesota by that group of anti-ICE agitators. Now remember, the feds had gone to judges to try to get Don Lemon arrested before. They went to a magistrate judge in Minnesota who didn't sign off on an arrest warrant for him. Then it went to a judge above him. He didn't sign off on an arrest warrant for him. Then it went to an appeals court. They also decided not to sign off for an arrest warrant for him. So there was experts who were predicting that perhaps the feds would go to a grand jury. It remains to be seen if that's what happened here, but we can confirm that Don Lemon was arrested in Los Angeles by federal agents just after midnight Los Angeles time at a hotel. Now, typically, standard procedure with an arrest like this is the defendant will likely make their first court appearance sometime the same day. So there's a chance we may see Don Lemon make his first court appearance in Los Angeles sometime today. But obviously, this is going to grab all sorts of headlines. 3 other protesters from that church storming, have already been arrested, including who the feds say was the organizer of that protest. The woman in the middle there is a school board member in St. Paul, and then the mugshot on the right is an online personality / agitator, if you want to call him that. He's known as the woke farmer. Those were the 3 people that the feds had already arrested, but we have confirmed that Don Lemon has now been arrested in Los Angeles in connection with that viral incident. We all saw the video of it that spread and drew widespread condemnation. The feds have been going after these people on FACE Act violations. So this is still breaking news. Once we get more details about the potential charges here, a court appearance, we'll of course update our viewers.
Now, let's discuss the legal pretense for these charges, because you did get the excuses from Don Lemon that everything you saw at the church initially was First Amendment protected protest. Never mind the fact that they were, first of all, trespassing on private property, and secondly, actively interfering with other people's First Amendment right to worship and practice their own religion in peace. So if you want to ask the question, well, then where does the First Amendment end? Yeah, it ends when you impede on other people's First Amendment. That's how rights work, right? You have the right to do something yourself. You don't have the right to interfere or obstruct or block other people from expressing the same right as you. That's how equal rights actually work, Mr. Don Lemon. And by the way, does it not seem like a major civil rights violation to go into a church and, yes, interfere with their own service, their own ability to worship? Well, the answer there is actually yes, and we know that specifically under the FACE Act of 1994, ironically a bill that was passed by the Clinton administration. So they can sit here and say the Trump administration is making things up, but no, actually, historically, this is something that Clinton wanted to pass, Senator Biden at the time wanted to pass, and what exactly is the full name there? It is Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances and Places of Religious Worship. Basically, this was a law initially designed to kind of stop pro-life activists from obstructing abortion clinics and things like that. But as part of the bipartisan aspect of the compromise there, it also made it illegal to obstruct places of religious worship, right? As the DOJ here points out, the act prohibits the use or threat of force and physical obstruction. Keep that in mind, right? Physical obstruction, which is exactly what you saw there from those protesters. Okay, they're standing in the front, they're blocking the service from continuing. That does what? That injures, intimidates, or interferes with a person seeking to obtain or provide reproductive health services, which you think, oh, so it only protects abortion, right? No. Here's the second part of that, right? Or to exercise the First Amendment right of religious freedom at a place of religious worship. Therefore, it is both a civil rights violation, it can be a civil penalty, but also a crime, right? A felony to obstruct places of religious worship, to block the exercise of the First Amendment at a place of religious worship. Now, Don Lemon is a man who we've clearly seen does not understand the law all that well. He was running around Minneapolis trying to argue with random people on the street that illegal immigration is not a crime, it's just a misdemeanor, despite the fact that a misdemeanor is a crime. He more recently was trying to say that shooting ICE agents, apparently, if they come to your door, was protected by the Second Amendment or something like that. So we understand this is a guy who, despite all of his elitism, does not understand the law or the Constitution on a very basic level. But of course, it should not surprise you that that also pertains to his bogus, ridiculous understanding of the First Amendment. Nope, that's not actually true.
So the FACE Act, you haven't heard about it for a good reason, Ali. It's not that you're not paying attention. It's because even though protection of houses of worship is an equal part of that statute, the DOJ hasn't used it before. And so we're using it now. We've used it in West Orange, New Jersey, in an attack on a synagogue there. This is another case that we're using. There can be private civil action under the FACE Act for invading a house of worship. There can also be DOJ civil action, and there can also be criminal action. In this case, we're looking at criminal action, and it's a misdemeanor to violate the FACE Act. But the Biden DOJ added felony charges on to FACE Act violations outside reproductive facilities under the Klan Act, an older 1800 statute that was passed after the Civil War to protect people from discrimination, where people conspired to violate the civil rights of free American citizens, including recently freed slaves. And that has been successfully used. So a predicate act of a violation of the FACE Act can actually become a federal felony conspiracy under Section 241 is what we call it, of the Klan Act. And so that is definitely something we're looking at as well. And there may be other collateral offenses too.
So they could potentially face felony charges here for that act on Sunday.
Absolutely.
And that's where this gets even better, because you may have heard some leftist hysteria that, can you believe what the Trump DOJ is doing? They're trying to pull out the Ku Klux Klan Act of the 1800s to charge these people. These are laws nobody has ever heard of. They're extremely old. How could you do this? But as the DOJ there points out, actually, it was a standard created by the Biden DOJ, right? They're the ones who created that and started charging FACE Act violations in conjunction with the KKK Act to do that, right? We didn't even invent the legal standard here that Don Lemon and his supporters are crying, how could you do this? Of course, again, despite all of the arguments that he made initially about the First Amendment, we even had today good old Brian Stelter, look at his face. Yeah, he's not happy about this, being forced to admit that as it pertains to everything that happened at that Minneapolis church service, may not have been First Amendment protected behavior after all. Take a listen.
A disturbing escalation against reporting in America. And I would also put it in the framework of protest. This is part of an ongoing pressure campaign against protests, especially the kind of provocative anti-Trump protest action that we have seen makes the administration so uncomfortable and frankly makes some voters very uncomfortable. This is an action, this arrest of Don Lemon, this arrest of this independent journalist who is live streaming and reporting in Minnesota. This is something that some MAGA loyalists have been demanding. They've been wanting to see it happen. When Trump promised retribution, this is the kind of retribution that some of his voters, not all, but some of his voters wanted to see. And I think that is, for better or for worse, some of the context for what we're seeing this morning. The First Amendment is meant to protect both a reporter's right to report, but also a congregation's right to worship. So legal experts might say this is somewhat complicated, although Lemon said all along he was there as a reporter, not as an activist. And he did a really important job showing people, all of us now who can watch the video, what happened inside that church. I want to back up to that Sunday morning. That intrusion into City's church was sincerely shocking to many, many millions of Americans, and myself included. People, saw that video, they saw Lemon's video, and they were uncomfortable by what happened inside that church. The idea that worship service was disrupted by protesters. And now there's a very interesting debate about whether the protesters were right or they were wrong to go into the church. But that is a political debate, and that's a debate about what forms of protest are effective. The Trump administration is moving that political debate into the legal arena and wanting to take it into court and have a court fight. And we know there have been these attempts to arrest some of the other protesters last week who were there.
Yeah, but what about the First Amendment? This is journalism that you're watching coming from the exact people who just a few weeks ago in this very city were melting down over Nick Shirley simply knocking on doors, right? Just talking to people. Did he try to barge his way into anywhere? Did he storm into something and then, engage in an unlawful protest? We didn't see any of that. But these are the people who said, he's not a reporter, he's not a journalist, he's just a guy with a camera, he's just a YouTuber. To which I asked the question then, what exactly is Don Lemon right now, right? Last I checked, he was fired from CNN just a couple of years ago. At this point, he now, too, is just a YouTuber. He's just a guy with a camera. So I guess the legal question now is going to be, is being just a YouTuber or just a journalist a legal excuse to basically not have the law apply to you in certain contexts? I mean, that's something we're going to have to find out. Don't get me wrong. Don Lemon's going to try to use the journalist excuse. Of course, never mind the fact that initially he was saying that all the protesters were engaged in First Amendment activity. It was legal and valid protests. And then he started to backtrack on that once people started to point out the FACE Act, to which he then went on the internet and tried to argue, oh, well, I wasn't involved in it. As the organizers, I was just there as a journalist. I was just there to document it. But I'd also like to point out here that the video record seems to show a lot more than that, right? Don Lemon was not just there as a journalist who happened to follow these people inside. He was just documenting what was happening. He had no clue what was actually going on, because the tape that day actually seems to show, first of all, he knows who these organizers are. He's super friendly with the person in charge of it all. And secondly, had prior knowledge of what was about to happen, which to me does seem to suggest a degree of coordination. And by the way, you know, you're allowed to be biased as a journalist, but the way in which he basically covered it and spin the whole situation as a kind of just propaganda video on behalf of those protesters does seem to suggest there's a lot more of a close relationship there with those protesters than simply, again, just being a journalist. But I guess this is the point in court that they're going to have to figure out. Was Don Lemon there that day just reporting, just following them around, had no clue what was happening, or was this a lot more coordinated? Was he a lot more involved in the whole situation than he is claiming now in the aftermath of it?
Into Minneapolis a little bit ago, and did some reconnaissance on the ground. I'm speaking to an organization there that's gearing up for resistance and protest. I've been pleasantly surprised to see the community coming together. Diverse community. If you see this, when we first pulled up, we're like, wait a minute, which operation are we at? And as it turns out, because we were like, well, this is kind of MAGA coded, right? Saw the American flag or whatever, but these are resistance protesters. They're planning an operation that we're going to follow them on. I can't tell you exactly what they're doing, but it's called Operation Pull Up. And it's Takima Armstrong, and she has been doing this since George Floyd, Dante Wright, and others, where they surprise people, catch them off guard, and hold them to account. And so that's what we're doing here. And then after we do this operation, you'll see it live. And these
That's what we're doing here, right? That's what we're doing here. Who is we, Don Lemon? I thought you're just a journalist, right? What's up with that? And then you notice even too, in Takima Armstrong's Facebook posts, she names a bunch of people that she's very happy. Thank you to all the activists who showed up and independent journalists. But notice, right, you see her, right? Keep in mind, this is one of the people who just got federally charged. We also have the woke farmer, who is the crazy guy with the beard. Who comes second there? Don Lemon, right? Thanking Don Lemon for his involvement in the situation. Now, she does say independent journalists, so maybe you could use that as the defense, but definitely it's a little bit shady to say the least, right? And it goes on. It goes on.
people who are wearing the uniform now, you think they're patriots?
I don't think so, especially those ICE agents.
That's
no,
what I'm talking
hell no.
about. Yeah. Well,
No, they're terrorists. They're traitors.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for your service. I appreciate.
Thank you for your service. Your service to who, Don Lemon? Your service to journalism? Is that what they were also doing? Seriously. How ridiculous does it get at a certain point? And then, of course, let's not forget the excuses that Don Lemon made, the defense and the justification for these crazy people storming into his service and making children cry.
Watch this guy here. Look, he's hugging his kid. And, you know, I just imagine it's uncomfortable and traumatic for the people here. But again, careful. It's very slippery right here. Yeah. It's uncomfortable and traumatic for the people here, but that's what really, careful, please, really slippery. Not kidding. That's what protesting is about. And so you heard what some of the folks said in there, that this is, they shouldn't be there, and, they shouldn't be uncomfortable, and this is our house and whatever. That's what protesting is about, is to make people uncomfortable. You may not like it, but, I mean, if they went into a church, any church.
Yeah, well, you do seem to be in pretty strong support of what happened that day. But again, I say it's not what protesting is all about. It's not what the First Amendment is all about. It's a violation of federal law. And now the question for the jury and the legal system here is going to be, did Don Lemon's actions that day constitute participation in the whole event? I'll be honest with you, I don't know the answer to that, right? I don't know how far the case is going to go. I don't know if some judge is basically going to try to rig it against us. So, we'll find all of that out. But just want to point out, at least for now, right? He has been indicted. We'll see what ends up happening. I don't have the highest of hopes necessarily, because we know how this stuff goes. I look at the Letitia James situations, by the way. Pretty cut and clear case, and the judge basically tries to throw it out on some technicalities. You know how all that stuff goes, but we'll find out, right? But anyways, that said, guys, let me know your thoughts. Be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you are new, and until next time, God bless and peace.